Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations in Horror. I am your host, Kevin L. Powers. I'm also the festival director and program director of Something Wicked Film Festival and events. And welcome to our podcast today. We've had some amazing films that we've spotlighted over the last few months since we started the podcast. We've done a lot of different genres that I'm really, really proud of. And we're finally getting around to some of the more niche markets, which I'm really, really been excited about because we've been doing this for several months now, and it's time to delve into all types of genres of film. That being said, one of my favorite genres, and we've only done a handful of these films from this genre, is the found footage genre. It's one of the more diverse genres out there. There are people who either love the genre or there are people who really hate the genre. There's not many people who are stuck in the middle because of various reasons. I, on the one hand, love the found footage genre. And I'm glad to always be able to talk about it. So today's episode, we're going to focus on the film Paranormal Activity, which is probably one of the most successful found footage franchises ever crafted. And with me today is Philip Wray, who will tell us all a little bit about why he either loves or loathes Paranormal Activity. Say hey to everybody, Philip.
Hey guys, hey Kevin, thank you for having me again. I have there's a interesting stuff with Paranormal Activity that I like to talk about, and interesting thing that I noticed when I did a lot of research in Paranormal Activity that I like to talk about today.
Oh, okay, some research. So everyone, he's ahead of me because I didn't do any research. Most research I did about Paranormal Activity is that I rewatched it. Because I haven't rewatched the original one pretty much since it originally came out. So, first off, Philip, because this is such a diverse genre, what were your original thoughts when you saw this movie, or what got you to see this movie? And do you even like found footage films?
Found footage films I actually like. I again, my favorite is Cloverfield, which hopefully we'll talk about in another podcast episode. But found footage I do find. I think some of the good found footage films I think it'd be really, really fun. With Paranormal Activity, what made me see that was, I mean, everyone saw the marketing. Everyone remembered the marketing when it came out of the film's so scary, it's gonna make it's going to make you run out of the theater screaming. Like, that was a big thing about this movie's marketing. That it's funny because other than Terrifier 3, there's not a recent horror movie in the last couple years that was one of its main marketing points was so scary you're going to run out of theaters, which I found very interesting. So like everyone, that marketing caught my interest. I watched it with my buddy, I didn't end up watching it in theaters. I watched it right when it came out on DVD, and I watched it with my buddy, and we kind of had our own little talking it, like watching it and doing our own little commentary and stuff, which made the film more enjoyable. I will say without that, I will admit with everyone else, the movie kind of does suffer from the nothing really happening. It's the suspense that really gets you, which depending on your level with horror movie, I can see how for some people if my wife was going to watch this, she'd be freaked out the entire time. But probably me, I may be speaking for you, Kevin, but for veterans who've seen a lot of horror movies, this is a movie where you're like, yeah, like this movie is kiddie horror, is what I would say.
All right, so I'm going to tell you about my experiences watching this, and you're not very far from my first impressions with this movie. So I learned about this movie long before it was ever released, and I learned about the original ending and the fact that I think it was Steven Spielberg, who saw it and eventually told them to redo the ending. And then when the movie, before the movie had a wide release, it was playing in certain colleges first, and so that built up a lot of awareness for the film. Part of the marketing aspects of it that made it a huge draw for when it finally did open wide. When it did open wide, I'd already read everything about it. I was already stoked to see it, and I was already a fan of the found footage movies, having to be a huge fan of the Blair Witch Project and Cannibal Holocaust and several of the other ones that came before this one. In regards to Paranormal Activity, I will agree with you 125% that it is, for me, a very dull movie. But when I saw it in the theater with a completely sold out, packed audience, listening to the reactions of the audience was simply amazing. I'm over there sitting in my seat like you. I was like, okay. I can understand the suspense that they're building up by having a lot of stationary shots, and you don't know when and if something's going to happen. Okay. I was pretty much that way the whole movie. It didn't really affect me at all. But watching it in the audience was simply amazing. I thankfully I was one that I saw it by myself. So what happened is I got one of those seats that was the random one seat somewhere, and I got a random seat in the back somewhere, which made it much more enjoyable. If I had gotten the seat up front, I wouldn't have been able to see all the reactions of everyone else. But I got one of those seats in the back, and I was able to watch and listen to all the other people who were probably not horror fans, who had been convinced that this was the scariest movie ever made, who went to go see this on opening night and were scared shitless. I was not scared shitless. I still, when I rewatched it, I also did not think it was scary at all. I could see why Spielberg wanted to change the ending. If you've seen the original ending, I think the new ending is much more effective. Even though the added, in my opinion, I think it's CGI. I think it does take a little bit out of it.
Yeah,
But
the ending, the lunge toward the camera is the only jump scare. The only time I actually jumped watching the entire movie.
exactly, and that's the part that Spielberg mentioned that they should reshoot, which is the ending. I think it's the concept. Like, it's a brilliant concept because for most of the movie, it's a stationary camera at night. And then the other half, you're watching this guy film, a very obnoxious guy, because eventually, because he becomes so against getting outside help and he thinks he's a man and he can do it himself, he becomes really annoying. Really fucking annoying. And thankfully, they don't have those type of characters in the sequels. But in the first movie, the guy is annoying, and you're actually hoping he dies.
Yeah, no, I agree. The characters, it's the prime example of white people not knowing what to do in a horror movie. Of like, anyone else is like, you run out of the house, and it's like, nah, we're not going to do that. No, the endings, because there's three endings. Obviously the ending we got, and then there's the original ending when the movie was first getting screened around, and then an alternate ending that they filmed. The original ending and the alternate ending, were like, what it kind of screams to me is they were like, wait, this could be a franchise. Let's not do these two, because in the first two endings, Kate dies. The original ending, she gets shot by the police. That was the first version that was screened around. And then the alternate ending, she goes to the camera, she slits her throat. If they had stuck to those endings, then they couldn't have done. They could have done their sequels and stuff. But like when they were doing that weird thing where they were trying to keep one long story, that wouldn't have worked. Which is why they did, where the ending they chose was fine for what they were trying to achieve of, so they can continue at least Kate's story.
I think that is a product of the Saw franchise and how they integrated every sequel into the bigger storyline as they kept going. The Paranormal Activity films did that thing, where they hint at a bunch of different things in the first movie that, in hindsight, could have been nothing more than them trying to add supernatural elements, like the Ouija board sequence in there. And it's the things that you see in your typical haunted house movie that they threw in there. But because it's a found footage movie, it seems more realistic, despite the fact that it's still ridiculous. I thankfully the Katie and Mika are able, the actors can play that off, because I hate to say this, whenever I see any film bring in a fucking Ouija board, I'm like, oh, good God, really?
Yeah,
Oh,
it's such a bad trope.
it is.
I do find it interesting about the authenticity of this first film because both the actors, Katie and Mika, that's the actors' real names, and both of them have barely done anything other than these movies. Mika has only done the Paranormal Activity movies, and then Katie, she's done a couple. Katie Featherstone, she's done a couple other films out of Paranormal Activity and stuff. But yeah, but not a lot. And same thing with Mika, which does help a little bit with the film of like making it feel more authentic because the fact that it's not like, oh look, it's freaking Scarlett Johansson that now we see it. Now he's like, okay, now you go back to and you lose. It does not that much impactful.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's the same with the Blair Witch Project. I mean, the actors in there, Heather Donahue did only a handful of movies after Blair Witch Project and then kind of disappeared to do something else. I keep forgetting what she did, but she went into another career. Joshua and then the other guy, I can't remember that. I mean, I think they did like a handful of movies after Blair Witch, but they will forever be the three people who are in Blair Witch Project who died. I'm sure there are some people out there who still believe that that's a fucking real movie. I'm hoping there is no one out there who believes Paranormal Activity and the entire franchise is realistic, because they go really far. By the time they get to the latest one, Next of Kin, I believe.
Yeah, I have not watched all the others. The probably my favorite Paranormal Activity is the marked ones. Actually, that to me that was my favorite of the ones I've seen of them because the sequels do kind of continue the trend of like trying to go with like this whole found footage, but like at least in this movie, I felt they were mostly able to do an adequate job of explaining it where you didn't get an eye roll versus some of the sequels where they're just like, oh yeah, just somehow coincidentally they also have this camera and then this camera, and it was just it's very like ass grab of how these cameras just suddenly also cover other things. Another found footage movie I like is Chronicle too. Chronicle as well.
So and you physically see the camera in that one a lot too.
Yeah.
Just to break off for a second. I actually really enjoy the third one the most, mostly because it's Katie and her sister as kids. I think any film with kids in it makes it a little bit more terrifying, and I actually think that was a much better film overall. But I think the biggest draw for the entire franchise is the way in which they utilize the camera, or whether it's a security camera. I think the second one uses the security camera. Then one of them uses the old VHS giant. I think the third one uses the big giant camcorder. And then of course I think it's the fourth one that uses the laptop a lot.
Yeah.
And and then by the time you get to the ghost dimension, it's a camera that sees the ghost dimension and shit. I think they get off the rails a little bit by the time they get to the ghost dimension, but I do agree with you that the marked ones is one of my favorite ones. Between the third one and the marked ones are the two that I enjoyed the most out of the entire franchise. I really hated that last one. Whatever they call that I think the last one was the ghost dimension. Was that the last one?
Yeah, the last one was. Let me check.
Yeah, Next of Kin was a splintered one. But I think the Ghost Dimension 3D. I think because it was in 3D.
Yes.
I thought was horrible. I did not like the way that they actually ended it and tried to explain the story. I was like, so this is how you're going to end this franchise that was really successful? This is one of the shittiest endings I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of shitty endings.
Yeah, it's yeah. So
I think it was a cool concept to put it in 3D, but they did that with Saw 3D too to end the franchise, and we all know how that ended with the lowest grossing of all the Saw movies, I believe at the time, was Saw 3D. But the charm of this first one is like you said, the marketing, the way it got people who don't see horror films to go into the theater to watch this horror film. Because it's very rare when you get people who don't watch horror films, to go to the theater. Blair Witch Project did it extremely well, and then Paranormal Activity did it extremely well. Blair Witch Project is a much, much better film, but Paranormal Activity, the franchise, has been much more successful.
Yeah, the Paranormal Activity is honestly it's the 20th century's Blair Witch Project. It really is, because it's paranormal, because when Paranormal Activity was so successful, it blossomed a bunch of found footage, all the found footage horror movies for a while. Like
Tons of found footage.
tons.
Blair Witch Project did not spawn a whole genre of found footage films. It was like it did its thing, and then no one it did not catch the lightning in the bottle. People did not replicate that success. But with Paranormal Activity, everybody was making found footage films. And, you know, Jason Blum and Blumhouse, whatever you want to call it, probably produced the most of them.
Yes, and so this is the interesting thing that I want to talk about and stuff. So right now, Paranormal Activity is recorded as one of the most profitable movies of all time because it barely cost anything and the return was so good. I also believe that Paranormal Activity is the reason Blumhouse is successful nowadays. Because if you look at what Blumhouse was producing before Paranormal Activity, it only produced, before Paranormal Activity, about 5 films. Mm-hmm. It did Hysterical Blindness, Griffin and Phoenix, The Fever, The Darwin Awards, and Graduation. All of those were either TV dramas, romance, like comedies, and none of them were, none of them were that big. No. After Paranormal Activity happened, right after that was the giant boom for that company that, again, everyone knows Blumhouse now. It is a big name company now. And I only believe that happened because of how successful Paranormal Activity was.
Oh yeah. And even Jason Blum, when they did Next of Kin, the most recent sequel, which is kind of a standalone film, he says, "Yeah, I don't know why they did another one. We should have just stopped at the last one." But the thing is, you know, as much as I admire Jason Blum and his business savvy with getting these films made for relatively no money and turning such a huge profit. I mean, he did the exact same thing with The Gallows, which is another found footage film that he did with this one. The Gallows was another movie he found that was made for almost nothing. Threw it at the theater, made a shit ton of money, despite the fact that no one seemed to like it other than me. And he kept doing that with tons and tons and tons of movies. And now he's doing like the Halloween trilogy, the Exorcist trilogy, whatever other fucking
Freddy's.
Yeah, you know, but the thing is, he's, with the exception of, I think, the Exorcist movies, his movies have all been relatively really low budget. He keeps it down to a really low budget in order to maximize profits, and that means that he's successful. And you know, and he gives a lot of first time people their taste of success. I mean, we wouldn't have Jordan Peele right now without him, because no one would have given him money to do Get Out. You know, yep. That was too edgy at the time.
Yep, and I think that Jason Blum wouldn't be in the position he was today if it wasn't for Paranormal Activity, because again, that put him on the map. After that, and then everything else, because the other movie they produced that same year was The Accidental Husband, was the other film that it produced that year, and then after that, Insidious was a couple years after that. And then after that, you had Sinister, you had The Purge, and then that was it. Then Oculus, like they kept rising, and getting more stuff. And I think Paranormal Activity is what really put them on the map because of that.
Yes, I would say that it's just like a New Line Cinema and Robert Shea, the house that Freddy built. If Nightmare on Elm Street hadn't been successful, we wouldn't have a New Line Cinema. And that's going to keep happening. Blumhouse just has got the best business model right now. that's the most successful theatrically and straight to streaming and everything else because he has tons of franchises that are strictly for streaming purposes only, in addition to all the theatrical ones. But I will say his most successful ones have always been his horror films, although he has done some amazing films like Whiplash.
Mm-hmm.
But he also did really shitty movies like what was, oh god, I think Josie and the Pussycats, which I'm sure he regrets doing. An interesting experiment that just did not work. But you know, Paranormal Activity is a winning combination. You have two main actors in a house filming themselves. It's a really simple concept, but it doesn't always work. If I don't know, have you seen his? Have you seen a live found footage movies? I've seen a ton of them. I've seen a ton.
I've seen a good chunk of them. I've seen some of the other ones we were talking about. I didn't watch The Gallows. I was very interested in seeing that. I didn't end up seeing that, but I've seen a couple. The thing too that's interesting also about, again, this is why I say that the Blair Witch Project, this is a modern day Blair Witch Project, is because also they didn't have a script. They did retroscripting like the Blair Witch Project did. They had an outline of what the story wanted to be, but other than that, they just gave, which is interesting now knowing that watching the movie, is the fact that actors didn't really have a script, that they were just having to improv most of the movie.
Yeah. But the thing about I think this has a testament to the editing. The thing about the editing for this is the way in which it does the pacing, the way the dissolves happen to show the passage of time. And I think that's what creates the suspense. It's something that's lacking in a lot of the lower budget found footage films. I've seen a lot of them. Trust me, I've seen a lot of them. And the pacing is the biggest issue. And the people that they hire to be the actors are acting. Whereas in this film and like the Blair Witch Project, they never come off as being actors. They almost seem 100% authentic people. I think that's what made Paranormal Activity successful, despite the ludicrousness of some of the things that happen in it, like the Ouija board. When I rewatched it, I was like, oh god, I forgot about the Ouija board scene. I was like, oh, yeah.
It's a trope. It's they feel like, okay, what, again, it's always like, okay, what do we see? What are the check marks in a horror movie?
Exactly.
We have the cat scare. If you watch horror movies, you can probably like count on all your fingers about how many horror movies had the cat scare. The Ouija board, it's the common tropes that they just do all the time. And it's funny because even now, past Paranormal Activity started a couple of those cliches. Well, those cliches happened before, but it was very after Paranormal Activity was apparent. The demon that for some reason likes to screw around for most of the movie by like rearranging the furniture and doing all this, and then at the movie gets hostile and kills the people. And it's like, why didn't you just kill them in the first place if that's your plan? Instead, you spent an hour trying to decide to be a furniture decorator first before you decided to actually kill the people.
Yeah, exactly. But the demon plays around with them until what, 7 movies?
Yeah.
7 movies worth of playing around. You have the demon. And we're not going to delve into the sequels as much. We're touching on those because we may touch upon some of the sequels later on.
Yeah.
Because there's so many of them, and the thing is, it makes for good conversation if we kind of break them up each, because as much as I enjoyed the experience of watching Paranormal Activity with an audience, when I rewatched it, I didn't get, like, it didn't do anything for me exactly. And I realized that watching it on a small screen, I actually missed a lot of stuff that was much clearer on the big screen. There are certain things I just didn't see, but I knew were there because I'd seen it on the big screen, and I haven't seen the movie in a while. So, and I was watching it on a Blu-ray, a really nice transfer on the Blu-ray, and not a regular DVD version of it. one of the reasons why I will always speak highly of seeing movies at the theater rather than on the small screen. It does not matter what type of TV you have. In this day and age, since the digital theatrical experience is not one that has to be recalibrated every few months, since it's a film reel, most of the time, every movie comes out the way the filmmakers intended it, and you see all the crispness of the film. I didn't see that when I was watching the Blu-ray version of this film. There was just stuff I knew was there. So the people who are probably watching this at home for the first time are just probably missing a lot of stuff, and they're missing the excitement of the movie when you watch it in front of a big audience.
It definitely, I agree. Paranormal Activity is one of those. There are certain movies that are audience movies.
Mhm.
They're movies you see with an audience because the experience you have there is way more. You watch a lot of these Marvel movies that, again, there's the clap moments where you can be like, all right, if you watch it at home, you're like, okay, but when you watch it in the audience, and everyone's roaring and stuff, you feel it. A Quiet Place. You're watching A Quiet Place you watch that at home, some of the quiet scenes are great and effective, but when you're in an audience and you are with a full stack of people in audience watching that movie and everyone's quiet and even like the slightest cough freaks you out, again, like you were saying, this is it amplifies your watching experience, and I think Paranormal Activity is one of those movies. It's really you need to watch it with an audience or with people. It makes it way more enjoyable experience than watching it by yourself. It's not impressive.
Yeah, you know, and in this day and age, it comes off because so many other people have done more effective found footage films than that one. You're right. I think that it diminishes the effectiveness of this first film. Now, you know, as many times as I've seen Blair Witch Project, that one's still fucking effective as shit for me. And to be honest with you, I'm not really sure why. I would have to take a deep dive into thinking about why Blair Witch Project, the original one, is still so damn effective for me versus Paranormal Activity, because I saw both of them in the theater with a really stacked audience, and both audiences had a great time. But when I think about found footage movies now and ones that people like, Paranormal Activity, people say, "Oh yeah, I saw it, and it's all good." And Blair Witch Project people love, or they hate it because they don't like the moving camera. But the audience will say, "Oh fuck, we loved Blair Witch Project. That was such a scary movie when it came out." Paranormal Activity is like, I saw it. It's okay.
I can actually easily answer that question. The reason why is because this is the issue with franchises. When you have franchises, if your movies do not change the game, do not improve every time, if it's a rinse and repeat, it diminishes the original movie a lot. Depending on how many you do it. Blair Witch Project had a remake, and I think it had only one sequel, I believe.
Well, no, both of them are sequels. It wasn't a remake. It was like a reboot.
Oh, so yeah,
really, yeah. It's the start of the reboots. So, yeah.
But there's only I'm confirming what
there's only three Blair Witch movies.
Yeah, there's only three. But look at Paranormal Activity. It's in the Saw world of how many sequels they've freaking had. They've had and all these spin-offs and all of that, and I think it has diminished it because, like you just said earlier, Paranormal Activity 3 does Paranormal Activity better. So when you go to watch Paranormal Activity, it's like, oh, well, have I already seen 5 Paranormal Activity movies? They all do the same. They don't change it enough, so it's not impactful. Versus Blair Witch, which has only had 2 other attempts at the project. So to them, it's like, okay, whatever. It doesn't do anything. When you do too much in a franchise, Saw's a good example of that too, where even like
Freddy, I think they're on 10 now.
They're on 10 now. You look at you look at the Friday the 13th movies, you look at Nightmare on Elm Street. There are some ones that are really good, and then the other ones are not as good. And the problem is the more they keep milking certain franchises, the diminish overall that franchise's field when you watch them.
Oh yeah, I can agree with you on that. I can agree with you on that 100%. You're right. You're right. That's exactly the problem. Like I said, by the time you get to Next to Kin, which was a straight to streaming movie, most people have never seen it. No, I almost didn't realize they even made one. I just happened to come across it. I was like, when the fuck did they make another Paranormal Activity movie? And then I read the thing about Jason Blum saying, "Yeah, I don't know why we made that one. We shouldn't have made that one."
Yeah, the more you do something and you don't change it up, it diminishes, and it's just not impressive anymore. That's why the Marvel movies are not doing so well anymore, because again, they just copy and paste a lot of what they're doing, and now again, audience feels the same way about Marvel movies they feel about Paranormal Activity. They mention, you go, "Oh, have you seen the latest Marvel movie?" They go, yeah, Marvel movies," and it's because you keep copying and pasting your stuff. Audiences are smarter than and and that's a big deal. And so hopefully they've learned their lesson with Paranormal Activity and they'll leave it alone, because there's no reason they need to let the franchise die.
Well, I think someone needs to come through and make it where it's not a found footage movie. If they take the concept and make it into not a found footage film, it'd probably be much more interesting. Let's get with the director. I can't even think of his name all of a sudden. The director who just did Alien Romulus to come and do fucking Paranormal Activity remake. We'll see how that happens.
Oh yeah, the Don't Breathe, Don't Breathe actor.
Yeah, we'll have him redo that. It'll be fine. He did Evil Dead. He could remake this one too. It'll be fine.
They actually have talked about doing there was talks briefly about doing a remake, but they've also quickly said, yeah, let's not do that. Although, funny enough, allegedly Blumhouse is considering doing a Blair Witch remake.
Yeah, I've heard that.
We'll see how that goes. As we saw what happened when they touched The Exorcist.
Hey, and they're going to redo it again.
Yep.
Due to the controversy surrounding the last one, and the fact that it just wasn't that good of a movie. But then again, I don't think those guys who redid the Halloween movies should have ever been given the reins to The Exorcist. But that's my personal opinion. Because and no one should do The Exorcist anyways. None of the Exorcist movies were successful except for the first one. That's a franchise that should have never had any sequels. I don't know why someone thought that there was going to be a good reason for a second one, a third one, a fourth one that had 2 sequels, a television series, and now another reboot. I'm like, dude, come on, let it die. None of them are successful. Let that shit die.
It's very interesting. This could be a whole other podcast about film horror movie sequels, because you look at every horror movie, there's rarely a successful horror movie, let me rephrase that doesn't get a billion sequels. You look at, again, think of Scream, think of Friday the 13th, think of Chucky, think of Nightmare on Elm Street, Paranormal Activity. Like, if there is a successful Exorcist, if a horror movie is successful, there's always doing a billion more sequels. Saw. You rarely see a successful horror movie that they do one and done and they go, all right, Megan's getting a sequel. The Black Phone's getting a sequel. Like, those are movies that
Follows is getting a sequel. And there's no reason to do a sequel that It Follows.
Like, again, one and dones, but again, they're successful. They're like, all right, they're successful. Do it again.
Yeah, well, that's the thing about horror films in general, as opposed to action films or dramas or anything like that. The thing is that the overhead for a horror film is much, much, much smaller, which yields a better profit margin. Therefore, it's an easier sell and an easier ploy to not have stars. Like, none of the franchises you mentioned has a star. They don't have stars. With an action sequel, you have to have a star. And those budgets keep going up and up and up. But people like Jason Blum have kept his costs down, except for when he takes other people's franchises like the Halloween and Exorcist. Those are outside his norm, and therefore the budgets are Five Nights at Freddy's. Those are the ones that are outside of his normal films that he produces. Therefore, the budgets for those are a different thing altogether. But keep in mind, the budgets for horror movies are typically either below $10 million each, or they're going to be at $35 to $50 million. That's what they make. You're not seeing $100 million horror movie like you see dramas at $100 million, or action movies at $100 million or more, or fucking animated movies that are at $100 million or more. Horror movies, they don't do that for.
And it's interesting because the main reason why, and people don't think about it, is the horror movie film genre is the only film genres you don't have. Rarely do they bank on stars.
Yeah,
they don't need to bank on stars because the genre itself is the star. You don't have to bank on. You don't need a big name in these horror movies to have people go see them. But if you see an action movie, you see a comedy, you see a drama, people don't go to see those unless they see a recognizable name on them. But you don't need that for horror movies.
No. You can every once in a while. You get a star to be in a horror movie and make that movie a very expensive horror movie, like Hannibal, a very expensive horror movie with a name director behind it, name actors. I think that was one of Julianne Moore and what's his face? I can't think of the guy who played Hannibal Lecter. But you're getting in Ridley Scott directing. Like, that doesn't happen in the horror movies typically. You don't
Anthony Hopkins.
Get it. Huh? Anthony Hopkins, yeah, thank you. That's completely against the norm. And of course, Gary Oldman. Like, who the hell's gonna? Yeah, that's not a cheap horror movie to produce, and it barely broke even. It did well. It broke even. We're all happy. Then they made Red Dragon, which also had stars in it. But that is not the norm. Paranormal Activity, there's no stars in any of these movies. The concept is a star. Insidious doesn't have a star in it. Doesn't have a star.
And be funny enough, the horror movies sometimes are the ones that make the stars. Like, again, Johnny Depp in the first Friday the 13th, not Friday, Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yep. Friday the 13th had Kevin Bacon.
Yep. It's usually the opposite. But yeah, so that's why a lot of times these horror movies, again, horror movies are the star. They don't need a name a lot of times to sell it to people. So,
Megan, as successful as fucking Megan is, there's no stars in Megan. You know who the star is? The fucking robot's the star. Yeah. The dance sequence is the star. That became a meme, and people said, "Oh, I gotta go see this movie Megan because of that freaking dance sequence." That's really short in the movie. It's not even that long.
Yep, but that's the marketing of it.
I think the closest you're going to get to a star who does low-budget horror movies is probably going to be Ethan Hawke, who did The Purge and created that franchise, did Sinister, created that franchise, and now did The Black Phone, another fucking franchise. Like, Ethan Hawke, and no one goes to see these movies because of Ethan Hawke.
Yep. They see it because it's a horror movie, and that's all they need. And that's the thing with Paranormal Activity. It's again, it's like it didn't need a big name.
Oh.
It just needed the concept and the marketing about oh, it's so scary, you're going to run screaming, pissing yourself.
Did you run screaming, pissing yourself?
I did not, unfortunately.
I definitely did not, although I'm pretty sure there was probably one or two in the audience I was watching it with who were probably run screaming and shit. That last jump scare did get some people, which is hilarious because I was laughing the whole fucking time. But I saw all of the Paranormal Activities in the big screen. For that, number one, I love found footage films. Number two is I like watching these type of films with an audience. And I think I saw most of them except for probably the fifth one. No, the marked ones with a big audience. I didn't see the marked ones with a big audience. And of course, Next of Kin was straight to streaming, and I still have yet to see the Japanese one since they haven't fucking released it in the States. So I've not seen that one yet. But for general purposes, these have been very successful franchise until the later ones. Because when I saw Ghost Dimension, there was almost nobody in the audience when I saw that one. I think that was left for the hardcore people who stuck around through 6 or 7 fucking sequels. Or however many, I can't remember now because I don't know what number that is. When they stopped numbering them, you know.
Yeah, and usually when they stop numbering them, they've gone on too long.
Yeah, I think they did the marked ones, and I think there's 2 after that one.
Yes, there is. Let's see. Let's see how many.
All I remember is the 4th one I didn't care much for. And I keep thinking the marked ones was more or less the 5th one, but I can't. Okay.
There's been 7 Paranormal Activity movies in total, with the marked ones being the first film, not with the title, like with the number on it, and then it was Ghost Dimension after that, and then Next of Kin was the last Paranormal Activity that's been released. So they've had.
And then I don't think they even include the Japanese one in that whole numbering system.
Correct. So technically, with that, it would be like 8.
Yeah, and that's because
it's had a video game too.
A video game?
Yes, it came out 2017.
Oh my god!
I did not play it, but apparently it was on VR.
Oh god! Oh VR! Oh, that might be cool though. I hate to say that might be fucking cool though. So, but there we go. That we without discussing the actual plot of Paranormal Activity, we've discussed Paranormal Activity. Are there any final words you'd like to say about this movie?
The other fun fact about this movie that I found out was they did a documentary about this movie, which is very interesting. We almost never got this movie because this movie was Paramount was not sure it was going to be a success, and they actually asked people. They were like, if you want this movie, we need like 100 demands, and it quickly met that.
Yeah, I was one of the people who actually signed a little petition when it was at the college, when it was making its college run, and said, yes, I want to see this fucking movie because I had read so much about the movie beforehand. Because I remember all that when it came out. I'm so fucking old. I remember when all that shit came out and they were doing that. Because I still like found footage movies. They just didn't make a whole bunch of them back then.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. It's always interesting about that of when you find out these movies that we now know are successful, but back then were not going to be. That almost didn't happen, but gladly they did.
Well, keep in mind that Spielberg convinced him to change the ending for one, and people are going to listen to him no matter what he says. When he says, "Do not release Roger Corman's Fantastic Four movie ever," they buy up the rights and they never officially release it. so he can produce his other 2 movies from director Tim Story. People listen to Spielberg, and so he has a few words about this movie. It gets out there, but from my understanding, I could be wrong because it's been a long time since I remember reading something in this effect, that when this movie came out, it was a really low budget movie. So the ideal of a major studio releasing a film with such a low budget movie was unheard of. They didn't do that. Because how do you market a movie that has almost? It's got no budget really. The thing is, studios like to hide the profit of these movies. Blair Witch Project, they tried to hide the profit for that movie. They didn't expect it to make any money. It made way too much fucking money, and they couldn't hide the profit. Yet when you talk to the people who were involved in that movie, Heather Donahue and Joshua and the rest of them, they haven't seen shit from that fucking movie because of creative accounting. There was these splinter little movies based on Blair Witch Project, books based on Blair Witch Project, fucking action figures based on Blair Witch Project, and they didn't see any money really. Paranormal Activity. pretty much the same way. It's a no budget film. How do you account if it makes a lot of money?
Yeah, originally the actors Katie and Mikkel were only paid $500 for the movie
It's
because
like, how do you account for that? And if the movie was cost maybe 3,000 to 5,000 to make, and it makes $1 million, how do you account for the profit margin for something like that? When Jason Blum released The Gallows, I think The Gallows was like a 300 or no, I think that was a $50,000 movie that he did. He released it at theaters, and everyone dogged the movie, said it was horrible, but it did really well the first week it was out, and it didn't have to make anything. It was like a $50,000 film. You
yep,
make $10 million, and you've made one of the largest profit margins of any film put out. Like, dude.
the production, the original version was 15K, and then once Paramount got a hold of it and stuff, and like did some more edits and all that stuff, they did some cuttings, the budget went up to 215K.
What?
And so and still that is very small. But if they hadn't even touched it and left it at that 15K, I mean, it is very wild. And that actually apparently DreamWorks, because another reason this movie never almost didn't happen was because it originally was under DreamWorks, and then Paramount acquired DreamWorks in 2005.
They're going to do a remake.
Yeah, and DreamWorks wanted to remake the movie with a bigger budget.
Uh-huh.
And then they were like, like you said, Spielberg was like, let's release this on, they were like, let's release this, do test screening, and if you guys still think it's bad, then we'll do the remake. And then again, it went so well that they were like, okay, never mind, we won't do that.
Which is rare. That just, I do have to, as much as I don't always agree with some of the stuff Spielberg does, I do have to, we all have to thank him for allowing us all to be able to see this and not his remake of this. As much stuff that Spielberg produces, a remake could have been lost in the ether really fast.
Yeah, and also I think if they had done a remake with a bigger budget, I think it would not have been as impactful as the version we got.
Yeah. I think I agree with you on that. I think because so many people saw Mika and Katie as normal people, it made it feel more real for them. It's like a camera that they have at their own house that they can shoot with. Everything seems so much more real, except for the very last 5 seconds of the movie. But up until that point, the whole movie feels so real. It could all really happen. The reactions are, Mika's male privilege and thinks he can build and fix everything himself and doesn't need help. Those are all realistic people in this film. They found a way to make the found footage ideal realistic, which most films that came after it were not able to do. Why the fuck are they still holding a camera when they should be running? Type of mentality. But you do believe these characters, and I do believe that's one of the reasons why it was so successful. Now, 6, 7 movies down the line, yeah. Maybe Spielberg should go ahead and do his remake now.
Yeah, now you can do it. Back then, again, what we got was a modern a 2000s rendition of the original Blair Witch Project. If they had done their remake back then, we would have got the newest version of the Blair Witch Project.
So with that, I think we've got our last final words. I don't think I have any more words other than to say that if you've never seen Blair Witch Project, see, I've got my brain mixed up because we've been talking about both these at the same time. If you've never seen Paranormal Activity or any of the sequels, I will suggest to go out and see the original one just for the experience of seeing it, whether you see it in a big audience like I did or if you see it on the small screen. That'll decide whether or not you watch any of the subsequent sequels. But I do think that it is a film that general audiences should check out, whether they've checked it out or not, because it can cross different lines and different age groups and different cultures and all that type of stuff. It does a really good job of doing that, and it's not terrifying enough to draw you away from it. You can skip some of the sequels, but I do believe that the first one is worth checking out, especially as it is one of the best versions of what a found footage film could be. So with that, I want to thank you, Philip, for joining us on Conversations in Horror. And I want to thank everyone out there who's been listening to us ramble and rave about this movie, Paranormal Activity, today. And I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. I really do. And check out some of our previous episodes. We've done lots of films before this one, and we will have lots of films after this one. So make sure you subscribe to our podcast on your favorite app, or go to Spotify, or go to our direct page at Lisbon, or even find us on YouTube. We are on multiple different social media outlets. With that, have a great day, and I will see you all on the next episode. Conversations in Horror is a Broken Lighthouse Pictures production, produced by Kevin L. Powers, executive produced by Kelly A. Inoka, and originally filmed via Zoom technology. Conversations in Horror is hosted by Kevin L. Powers and co-hosted by various horror film lovers and filmmakers. To learn more about Mr. Powers, please make sure to check out his Patreon page and other social media platforms. Conversations in Horror is copyright 2024 Broken Lighthouse Pictures production.